Hello, it has been such a long time since we did anything with our class novel, so I think it's high time we went back and that we finished it. You might remember that Michael is the main character of the story, and he is a boy who has been on a journey around the world in a small boat with his mother, his father, and his dog called Stella. You might also remember that Michael went to save Stella and they both slipped overboard, and that's how Michael ended up on a desert island. At first, Michael thought he was alone, but then somebody mysteriously started leaving food and water so that he could stay alive and survive. This person turned out to be an old man who also lives on the island, but he doesn't seem particularly friendly. Michael is desperate to escape, so he builds a fire to see if he can attract another ship, but the man gets furious and stops him. At first, Michael obeys him and sticks to his side of the island and doesn't make any fires because he doesn't want to upset him, and because he also realizes that this man has been keeping him alive. Eventually, though, Michael's desire to be free gets the better of him and he builds another fire secretly, and just as he's about to light it, the old man comes and stomps it out. Michael gets so upset at this that he throws himself into the ocean, not listening to the old man's shouts of warning. Inside the ocean, there's a jellyfish waiting for him, and where we left off, Michael was sinking into the depths of the ocean, fully expecting to die. This is where Chapter 7 starts off. Sit back, relax, get yourself comfortable, and let's start Chapter 7. All that Silence Said. I smelt vinegar, and I thought I was at home. My father always brought us back fish and chips for supper on Fridays, and he loved to soak his in vinegar. The whole house would stink of it all evening. I opened my eyes. It was dark enough to be evening, but I was not at home. I was in a cave, but not my cave. I could smell smoke, too. I was lying on a sleeping mat, covered in a sheet up to my chin. I tried to sit up to look about me, but I couldn't move. I tried to turn my neck. I couldn't. I could move nothing except my eyes. I could feel, though. My skin, my whole body throbbed with searing pain, as if I'd been scalded all over. I tried to call out, but could barely manage a whisper. Then I remembered the jellyfish. I remembered it all. The old man was bending over me, his hand soothing on my forehead. "You better now," he said. "My name Kensuke. You better now." I wanted to ask after Stella. She answered for herself by sticking her cold nose into my ear. I do not know for how many days I lay there, drifting in and out of sleep, only that whenever I woke, Kensuke was always there sitting beside me. He rarely spoke, and I could not speak, but the silence between us said more than any words. My erstwhile enemy, my captor, had become my savior. He would lift me to pour fruit juice or warm soup down my throat. He would sponge me down with cooling water, and when the pain was so bad that I cried out, he would hold me and sing me softly back to sleep. It was strange. When he sang to me, it was like an echo from the past. Of my father's voice, perhaps. I didn't know. Slowly, the pain left me. Tenderly, he nursed me back to life. The day my fingers first moved was the very first time that I ever saw him smile. When at last I was able to turn my neck, I would watch him as he came and went, as he busied himself about the cave. Stella would come and lie beside me, her eyes following him too. Every day now I was able to see more of where I was. In comparison with my cave down by the beach, this place was vast. Apart from the roof of vaulted rock above, you would scarcely have known that it was a cave. There was nothing rudimentary about it at all. It looked more like an open-plan house than a cave. Kitchen, sitting room, studio, bedroom, all in one space. He cooked over a small fire which smoked continuously at the back of the cave, the smoke rising through a small cleft high in the rocks above. A possible reason, I thought, why there were no mosquitoes to bother me here. There always seemed to be something hanging from a wooden tripod over the fire. Either it was a blackened pot, or what looked like and smelled like long strips of smoked fish. I could see the dark gleam of metal pots and pans lined up on a nearby wooden shelf. There were other shelves too, lined with tins and jars, dozens of them of all shapes and sizes, and hanging beneath them innumerable bunches of dried herbs and flowers. These he would often be mixing or pounding, but I wasn't sure what for. Sometimes he'd bring them over to me so that I could smell them. The cave house was sparsely furnished. To one side of the cave mouth stood a low wooden table, barely a foot off the ground. Here he kept his paintbrushes, always neatly laid out, and several more jars and bottles, and saucers too. Kensuke lived and worked almost entirely near the mouth of the cave house when there was daylight. At nights he would roll out his sleeping mat across the cave for me, up against the far wall. I would wake in the early morning sometimes and just watch him sleeping. He always lay on his back, wrapped in his sheet, and never moved a muscle. Kensuke would spend many hours of every day kneeling at the table and painting. He painted on large shells, but, much to my disappointment, he never showed me what he'd done. Indeed, he rarely seemed pleased with his work, for just as soon as he'd finished, he would usually wash off what he'd done and start again. On the far side of the cave mouth was a long workbench, and hanging above it, an array of tools, saws, hammers, chisels of all sorts. And beyond the workbench there were 3 large wooden chests, in which he would frequently rummage around for a shell perhaps, or a clean sheet. We had clean sheets every night. Inside the cave he wore a wraparound dressing gown, a kimono I later knew it to be. He kept the cave house immaculately clean, sweeping it down once a day at least. There was a large bowl of water just inside the cave mouth, and every time he came in he would wash his feet and dry them before stepping inside. The floor was entirely covered with mats made of woven rushes, like our sleeping mats. And everywhere, all around the cave, to head height and above, the walls were lined with bamboo. It was simple, but it was a home. There was no clutter. Everything had its place and its purpose. As I got better, Kensuke would go off and leave me on my own more and more, but thankfully never for too long. He'd return later, very often singing, with fish, perhaps fruit, coconuts, or herbs, which he'd bring over to show me proudly. The orangutans would sometimes come with him, but only as far as the cave mouth. They'd peer in at me, and at Stella, who always kept her distance from them. Only the young ones ever tried to venture in, and then Kensuke only had to clap at them, and they'd soon go scooting off. During those early days in the cave, I so much wished that we could talk. There were 1,000 mysteries, 1,000 things I wanted to know, but it still hurt me to talk, and besides, I felt he was quite happy with our silence, that he preferred it somehow. He seemed a very private person, and content to be that way. Then, one day, after hours of kneeling hunched over one of his paintings, he came over and gave it to me. It was a picture of a tree in blossom. His smile said everything. "For you, Japan tree," he said. "I, Japanese person." And after that, Kensuke showed me all the paintings he did, even the ones that he later washed off. They were all in black and white wash of orangutans, gibbons, butterflies, dolphins, birds, and fruit. Only very occasionally did he keep one, storing it away carefully in one of his chests. He did keep several of the tree paintings, I noticed. Always of a tree in blossom. A Japan tree, as he called it, and I could see that he took particular joy in showing me these. It was clear that he was allowing me to share something very dear to him, and I felt honoured by that. In the dying light of each day, he would sit beside me and watch over me, the last of the evening sun on his face. I felt that he was healing me with his eyes. At night, I thought often of my mother and my father. I so much wanted to see them again, to let them know that I was still alive. But, strangely, I no longer missed them. In time, I found my voice again. The paralysis gradually lost its grip on me, and my strength flowed back. Now I could go out with Kensuke whenever he invited me, and he often did. To begin with, I would squat on the beach with Stella and watch him spearfishing in the shallows. So still he stood, and his strike was lightning fast. Then, one day, he made me my own spear. I was to fish with him. He taught me where the bigger fish were, where the octopus hid under the rocks, how to stand still as a heron and wait, spear poised just above the water, my shadow falling behind me so that the fish were not frightened away. I tell you, spearing a fish for the first time was like scoring a winning goal for the mudlarks back home. Just about the best feeling in the whole world. Kensuke seemed to know every tree in that forest, where all the fruit grew, what was ripe and what was not, what was worth climbing for. He climbed impossible trees nimbly, foot-sure and fearless. Nothing in the forest alarmed him, not the howling gibbons swinging above his head to drive him off their fruit, not the bees that swarmed about him when he carried down their comb from a hollow high in the tree. He used the honey for sugaring and for bottling fruit. And always, his family of orangutans came along, shadowing us through the forest, patrolling the tracks ahead, scampering along behind. All Kensuke had to do was sing, and they'd come. They seemed almost hypnotized by the sound of his voice. They were intrigued by me and by Stella, but they were nervous, and we were nervous, and for the time being, we kept our distance from each other. One evening, quite unexpectedly, as I was watching Kensuke at his fishing, one of the young ones clambered up onto my lap and began to examine my nose with his finger, and then he investigated my ear. He pulled it rather harder than I liked, but I didn't yelp. After that, the rest followed suit, using me as if I were a climbing frame. Even the older ones, the bigger ones, would reach out and touch me from time to time, but thankfully they were always more reserved, more circumspect. Stella, however, still kept a certain distance from them, and they from her. In all this time, I suppose it must have been some months on the island by now, Kensuke had said very little. The little English he did speak was clearly hard for him. When words were used between us, they proved to be of little help in our understanding of each other, so we resorted, for the most part, to smiles and nods, to signing and pointing. Sometimes we even drew pictures in the sand to explain ourselves. It was just about enough to get along, but there was so much that I was burning to find out. How had he come to be here all alone on the island? How long had he been here? And how had he come by all these pots and pans and tools and the knife that he always wore in his belt? How come one of his wooden chests was stuffed with sheets? Where had they come from? Where had he come from? And why was he being so kind to me now, so considerate, when he had clearly resented me so much before? But whenever I ventured any such question, he would simply shake his head and turn away from me like a deaf man ashamed of his affliction. I was never quite sure whether he really did not understand or just did not want to understand. Either way, I could see it made him uncomfortable, so I probed no more. Questions, it seemed, were an intrusion. I resigned myself to waiting. That was our story for today. Tune in next time to find out the little secret that Kensuke has been keeping hidden away on his island. Bye for now.